Misunderstood because of her green skin, a young woman named Elphaba forges an unlikely but profound friendship with Glinda, a student with an unflinching desire for popularity. Following an encounter with the Wizard of Oz, their relationship soon reaches a crossroads as their lives begin to take different paths. Wicked Part 1 is directed by Jon M and stars Ariana Grande, Cynthia Erivo, Jonathan Bailey, and many, many more. So, Matt, what'd you think of Wicked Part 1?
All right, so Wicked is Jon M latest foray into directing a musical, with his most recent work being that of In the Heights from a few years ago, I think about 3 or 4 years ago at this point. It's actually a film that I really, really enjoyed, and you not so much. It's something I'm still a little bitter over.
Oh, yeah. You can go back and watch that review. You shouldn't, because our reviews are quite bad, but they do exist if you so
I went back and looked at the review, and it was a little iffy.
Yeah, we've gotten better.
We've gotten much better at talking in front of cameras and on microphones, et cetera, et cetera. So let's get back to Jon M, because one of the things I absolutely love about his films, also including Crazy Rich Asians in here, is that he has this great ability to bring a scene to life. And his frames are often filled with so much personality, giving his films a great sense of place. Mm-hmm. And in Wicked, I think he really expands on these values and really made a film that absolutely is brimming with life, in my opinion. And he achieves this in so many ways. One being these absolutely gigantic sets, which are completely real and built from scratch. And this includes Munchkin Land, Shiz University, the water, boats and all, to the streets of Oz. It is really impossible here to deny the craftsmanship and the effort that went into all these physical details. But it's not just the sets that add to the sense of place, but everything that fills them. These imaginative objects and how they're interacted with, whether it be a makeup kit or a miniature floating hot air balloon delivering a letter. And lastly, and most importantly, is the cast. How they interact with each other within these sets and everything in it really makes this film feel extremely well lived in and almost like it's an actual place. Now, that is actually where my written notes end, because we literally just got out of the movie a year ago.
A year ago?
Hold on.
No. Leave it in.
No,
leave it in.
I'm not leaving that.
Leave it in.
An hour ago. While I have so many thoughts, the one that's most prominent in my mind is that I absolutely love this. And I don't think that's any surprise to you. I haven't felt this excited by a musical film adaptation, I think, in many years. I felt excited by the end of this movie. I'm ready for the sequel. There's just so many things to talk about in here, from the acting, which was, I thought, absolutely brilliant, the musical numbers, which involves so much creativity developing from a stage play onto the screen. I think that gives you so much more freedom to be able to, creating these sets and having objects move and different things, like having an actual train that moves that they built. So all these things, I think, just expand on the musical and expand on this sense of place. And it's the thing I'll keep coming back to in this review.
If I sound grumpy at all during this review, I want to say that this movie could have been so much worse than it is. Like, it's not a perfect film, but I dreaded going to this movie, and I did leave pretty pleasantly surprised. Our Gladiator 2 review will be out like a day or two after this one, but I think seeing those films in such quick succession with one another, they oddly fit nicely together, because one is such an energy suck, and the other one is so clearly full of charisma and energy in ways that the prior one just completely lacks. But to be, like, again, in the presence of filmmaking that just gets the fundamentals right, building a scene, capitalizing on momentum, snappy, engaging dialogue, actual characterizations, even if they're not the deepest characterizations, there are characters here that are distinct from one another, which we'll get into Gladiator 2, but that's not a thing. But anyway, I'm not a member of this fan base, but this film has a very, very rabid fan base, and I walked out of this film thinking there's no way that you could have been disappointed with what they achieved here. Again, I don't know the nuances of it, but I feel like you probably got what you wanted being a fan of this film, and that's really cool and honorable. Going to something that you were talking about is the art design here. There are so many interesting and creative sets here. It almost reminds me of like a Guillermo del Toro movie, like when you're looking around and you see all of these cool details that just bring you into that world even further. Like, it's so much fun to scan the frame and just see the little details on people's clothes, or like the light fixtures in the giant hallway, or like the way floors are, or the color palettes. There's so many cool things going on here. It's such like a maximalist sensory overload in the way that this film is constructed from an art design perspective. You really have to appreciate all the work that went into it. Like, not only all of the physical work, but the planning too. Each sequence, each set, each musical number, they all have a particular ethos in the way that they look, and they all have a similar color palette. It doesn't even mention the choreography, like thinking of how the choreography and the costumes have to fit into this set as well with the dance numbers they're going to do. It's a monumental amount of work, but it's also just really really intelligently executed.
Such a plus to the film is because it builds all these sets that the camera is really free to do whatever it wants. It could look at places from different angles, up, looking down. It's just like the details have been so well thought out. It doesn't matter where you place the camera in any of this set because you could just do so much with it.
I said to you too, walking out of the film, that I thought the visual effects were really good. It's not the type of visual effects that look exactly real all the time, but they're the type of visual effects that sell you and look real within the world they're creating. You actually had brought up that the train was built and that the train was real. I thought the train was special effects because it had this green sheen on it that looked like special effects, but either way, I'm sure it was enhanced with visual effects in some way. But even that looked like a little fake to me, but it looked fake in the way that it would fit perfectly within the world that we're inhabiting. So I thought that they did a really terrific job with just like the homogeny of the way that everything looked and engrossing you in this world.
Yeah, it actually reminded me a lot, oddly, of the Harry Potter films.
Yeah.
The sense
Totally.
of place, the sense of the set design, the sense of filling all these sets with all these objects that you could look at, and also how these sets and everything, all the objects in them, give us a sense of personality of the characters that we have here. So I think that's a great segue into Ariana Grande as Glinda and Cynthia Erivo as Elphaba, because the set design, it really caters to their personalities and also the way they're treated in the film. Obviously, Cynthia Erivo as Elphaba, she is really cast aside. She's judged by her skin complexion. She is situated in Glinda's room to a mere corner with a bed that's almost reminiscent of like Harry Potter's bed in the closet.
Yep.
There you have Glinda just has this entire room with all this stuff, cases and cases of objects and shoes and clothes and makeup and a whole ass mirror that pops up that she could see herself in. Elphaba doesn't have anything. Her parents are obviously well off, as we see in the beginning of the movie. They really put their other daughter above her, but you could just see the objects that are filling all these sets, the way they influence and they have a reflection on the characters themselves.
One of the funny things about that scene is Glinda thinks that she's being nice by leaving her a little space, and which just shows how ignorant and self-absorbed her character is, and that's the root of a lot of the humor of this film. Ariana Grande, I think, is really great. She has this terrific comedic sensibility and comedic timing that you just can't teach. It's something that, like, I think we've seen in a lot of Marvel movies. Like, Marvel movies always have that comedic quippiness, and I think some actors naturally take to it a lot better than other actors. But anyway, I think that she's very, very good at it, and she's able to embody this character with a tremendous amount of fun sensibilities that I really, really liked. And then Cynthia Erivo is much more the heart of the film. She has a couple of tearful moments. She does a fantastic job in a lot of the film's more dramatic passages. Not to mention, I mean, a perfect singing voice, right?
I also want to mention Jonathan Bailey. He plays Firio in the film, and he is just swoon-worthy.
Yeah, I could have used a bit more of him. I'm assuming there's a lot more of him in the second part.
I think there's more in the way because I remember there's a soundtrack that mentions his name specifically, but I don't recall in what context. Because I haven't seen the stage play, so I don't know. But there's definitely more. I can say that. It goes to show, I think, and obviously this story has a lot of different political themes, but one of them is the difference between privileged and unprivileged members of society. Privileged members of society often think so much of themselves, they're more popular, they have a lot of influence. And then on the other side, the less advantaged in society, I think, are more humble and they're kinder and gentler souls. This difference between the two of them in which they originally spar. And this is odd because we're talking about a lot of the narrative in the movie, and I think like most people who are going to this movie have most likely seen the stage play.
Yeah.
We didn't mention this at the beginning of the review, but neither of us have seen the stage play.
Yeah, I have some vague idea of what happens in it, and I know the songs just from being in theater in high school and people singing them all the time, but that's about where my knowledge ends.
Yeah, I would say I've been obsessed with the Wicked soundtrack for a long time. I've seen clips on YouTube. I've listened to the whole soundtrack multiple times. So I have an idea of the story and where it's also heading. There were parts of the film that I would say that I was surprised or excited by because they were new to me.
Going to something that I didn't love about the film, I think, is the pacing. It starts off great, it ends great, and I think in the middle you can feel a bit of that sluggishness, especially with their decision to make this a two-parter. Tighter is like not always better, but again, I do feel like the film is straining somewhat in the middle portion. I understand the argument that perhaps they want to spend more time in the world and they want to slowly build the tension and story across two parts. But then that leads to some other issues towards the end. This film ends just as things are starting to get going, just as Act 1 ended in the musical. But the main difference here is that you would have a 15-minute intermission in the musical and then come back and see what happens. Here, I finally we were actually getting somewhere and then the movie ended. And I wish I had felt that way for more of the runtime. Again, I know that it's adapting source material and there's only so much they can do to alleviate this issue. But either way, I just think it's a natural negative effect of some of the choices they made here.
I actually disagree. I really enjoyed the pacing of the film. What it did was it gave the film room to breathe and live in these scenes and live in the setting. And I believe in other films, like the way Deathly Hallows was split up into two movies. I'm trying to think of another sequel that I was really excited about. Oh, after Pirates 2, when Barbossa walks down.
Pirates of the Caribbean 2 is actually the only movie I've ever walked out of.
I really enjoyed that ending, actually. It was exciting to me.
Well, actually, I didn't make it there because I walked out.
Oh, so you didn't.
But then I really liked the third one. It made no sense to me, but I thought it was enjoyable.
Because you walked out of it. Anyways, but those are two examples of movies in which I felt just this rush of excitement of what was to come. And I felt like I didn't need anything more in that moment. So for this, it actually worked for
No, I felt that way too. I'm really looking forward to what's coming in the second half, but how exciting and propulsive it was in the last half hour made me realize how the prior 2 hours is not that way at all.
Okay.
It actually retroactively made the rest of the film feel more sluggish to me.
Yeah.
Did this movie need to be 2 hours and 40 minutes long over part one? I don't really think so. I think you could have got a pretty tight 210 with this and it would have been really good. Whatever. I'm not a Wicked fan, so maybe some people, they want to spend as long as possible in this world, and it's just not me. So
I think I'm one of those people.
Yeah.
I want to talk about some highlights with the musical numbers. One Short Day, which has always been one of my favorites from the soundtrack. I thought this was just brilliant. And I loved all the little details about Oz that fit in a little bit to The Wizard of Oz, which if you've watched this channel, you know how much I absolutely adore The Wizard of Oz. It's one of my favorite films of all time. When they're walking into see Oz, there's this shot from behind them and you see a little bit of their dark silhouettes. And that is such a callback to the original Wizard of Oz. There were moments within this film that almost felt like they reminded me of the original in a reimagined way.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I was definitely reminded of The Wizard of Oz at some points. I think that this film didn't feel like a bastardization of that in any way, which is a hard thing to do. I mean, especially in our IP culture, we're just milking everything we possibly can and bastardizing it all. So I felt like this film added some interesting legacy and some interesting details to The Wizard of Oz that I wouldn't have thought of. Now I have a better understanding of that world. So I did like that.
Just in terms of scenes and production value, One Short Day I thought was just absolutely insane. I had chills.
I did think that for me, the highlight is the last 20 minutes or so, and that includes up to Defying Gravity. That was a real high point of the film. I said to you on the way out that if you have one really terrific scene in you, then you should put it at the end, and that's what this movie did.
Another thing I want to talk about is the audio mixing and production in this film, because it is something that needs to be mentioned. If people aren't familiar, all the actors are singing live on set. One thing I noticed about a lot of other musicals is that you'll notice the change between dialogue and the musical number. You'll hear the production has changed into this very crisp and clean produced musical number that's obviously been done on a soundstage.
There was no post at all here with their singing?
I'm sure there's being posts done in the mixing process, maybe adjusting levels or whatever you have, but all this was recorded live.
Okay.
Which I think is just absolutely amazing to be able to perform that way while you're acting as you would on a stage play, but also being able to capture that audio for film, which is a big undertaking when it comes to a musical, I think. But that being said, I did see a clip of Cynthia Erivo. She's literally flying upside down during Defying Gravity. When she is going upside down on that broomstick, she's actually singing while she's flying upside down on that broomstick. That's the audio that's in the film.
Interesting.
So it's not like they dub it over afterwards. That is the audio. To have that control, to being able to belt, doing a flip in the sky, I think is absolutely insane.
So you ready to go to grades?
I am ready to go to grades. I give the film an A-. I really, really loved it. I enjoyed it. Something we didn't talk about in the review that I'll talk about now is that there were a couple parts that I thought were a little cheesy and maybe unnecessary. There was a couple moments during Defying Gravity or the lead up to Defying Gravity. I don't want to say too much for those that haven't seen the film yet, but there's something involving the hot air balloon. Whenever I heard the soundtrack in Defying Gravity, there is this moment that the tension simmers down for a moment. And it does in this film as well when that moment occurs. But I feel like the hot air balloon just distracted from that with this unnecessary action sequence. Otherwise, I mean, oh my gosh. The acting was so great. The sets were so great. The musical numbers were so great. I am so excited for the next part. I haven't been this excited about a musical in quite a while. I don't know. I just really, really loved it.
I'm going to give it a B-. Again, I think that there's a lot to appreciate. I think the actors are probably my favorite part. I love the actors. I thought they did a really terrific job. All of the craft stuff is terrific. It just isn't why I go to the movies. It really comes down to that. I think that it was a lot of fun. It was a cool spectacle while I was watching it. I'm not sure I'm going to think about it much past like the next hour of my life. But like, yeah, I'm sorry. Like this stuff that just doesn't touch me. It just doesn't. I appreciated it for what it was. I think a lot of work went into it. I think this could have been so much worse. The type of film that really keeps me up and keeps me thinking are types of films that are very thought-provoking or not really something that is going for like the type of spectacle. Even something like Mad Max Fury Road is not a movie I'm going to think about a lot. That movie is kind of on the same level as this with me, where like I appreciate a lot about that, but there's just like not much to dissect. That's just how my brain works. It's very cognitive about like the way that it thinks about film and the way that I like to break down film and continually think about it from different angles. And that's just not something I can do here. I'm glad that you had a nice time. I am.
I disagree with some of those things, but I am just not going to get into it right now. I feel like it's not worth it.
Do you think this movie is very thoughtful and intellectual? And
I think there's some pieces of that lurking under the surface here.
I think it has things to say that like, children's books for 4-year-olds have to say.
Ooh.
No, it's really not that complicated.
No,
I mean,
it's not
love
that
people
complicated.
who are different, don't judge them.
Oh, there are adults in this world that need to learn the lessons that this movie has to teach.
No, I know that, but it's again, this is a simplified moral. It's
exactly.
not like,
which adults still need to learn apparently.
Do the Right Thing does this a lot better. How about that?
Yes.
That's a movie I still continue to think about.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah, yes.
I understand where you're going with this.
And that's it for a review of Wicked Part 1, which is now in theater, so go check it out. Definitely let us know what you thought of the film below in the comments, and we will see you next time.